Welcome to GRN, the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. The intent of each episode is to educate, energize, and equip you with information and hopefully a bit of wisdom to apply in your life and within your community. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, your host, coming to you from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. According to the American Psychological Association, part of the definition of resilience is bouncing back from difficult experiences. And today we're going to look into growth and resilience for ex-offenders. How do they bounce back and become integral and functioning members of their communities and for their families? In fact, we will see how it's impossible to separate the offender from the community when it comes to resilience. And in the studio to help us sort through some of this today is Mr. Kevin Gay, President and CEO of Operation New Hope, a community development corporation in Jacksonville, Florida. Kevin came out of corporate America about 2 decades ago to give back to his community. As he recently related to me, he was congratulated and challenged by a local minister. Congratulated for his work on international mission trips and challenged to take that same energy and zeal into his own community. And Kevin did just that. When he stepped into a high crime and poverty area of Jacksonville, he found, and I know he'll correct me if I overstate this, that not only homes that were empty and in a state of disrepair, he found a community of people in their own various states of disrepair. Crime had touched the community in more than one way. In a little less than 2 decades, Operation New Hope has restored in the area of Jacksonville more than 80 homes and initiated the Ready for Work program for ex-offenders, working with over 5,000 during this time. He and his team are on their way to replicate their model to provide faltering communities and people in struggling situations a renewed chance at life, a renewed sense of being, and a restored sense of purpose. And his work has captured the attention of not 1, not 2, but 3 United States presidents, which I'm sure he's going to tell us about this morning. So, Kevin, welcome, my friend, to the GRN World Headquarters.
Steve, it's great to be with you this morning. I really am honored, and I appreciate the invitation to be with you.
And this is great. And for those who don't know Kevin, this is probably one of the more positive people you will ever meet in your life. And before I forget, and Kevin, make sure I give it correctly, I want to give the website. And it's operationnewhope.org. operationnewhope.org. All right, let's start, Kev. You heard my intro about resilience. Give us a little background about Operation New Hope and how resilience fits into your mission of restoring hope in the community and with ex-offenders and their families.
Well, Steve, we started, as you talked about early on, in 1999. I had been on the board of the HabitJax, which is the Habitat affiliate here in Jacksonville, Florida. A great one of the largest in the world, actually. Love the model. We were going into communities as we do with this model. But there was something for me that I wanted to do that was a little beyond the bricks and mortar design work that's going on in communities. Because when you think about it, communities really are way more than bricks and mortar. They're the great asset in any community is the people. And so what I constantly saw when we were doing a lot of this work was people looking at the construction, young guys across the street from a build, obviously not working. And it seemed to me kind of a paradox where we were rebuilding physical infrastructure, but really looking across and seeing brokenness and addiction and unemployment.
In the same community.
In the same communities where we were building, why we would not blend the two together. And so I had a dream, idea that I wanted to start a community development corporation to be able to possibly do that. And so that's how Operation New Hope was born. It wasn't born around reentry. It wasn't, I didn't know anything about those issues. It really more was my heart had been touched on the fact that, communities have been broken. There was a great flight to suburbia that took place, 50 years ago and left most of urban America in decay. And those left living in urban communities, had really been a part of that decay of the buildings. The employment opportunities had left the urban communities, limited transportation issues. And so we really saw a major decline with families. And a lot of people, are saying, well, how in the world did we get to where we are today? And a lot of that is coming down, I believe, to this movement that took place 50 years ago where communities were broken. And the mix of communities that are so healthy today, which are kind of the fabric of most great communities, is you have low-income people and upper-income people all living together, straight, gay, everything. But when we began this model of urban development, redevelopment, things began to take a turn for the worse, I think, in urban communities. So it has been about trying to go back and figure out, how do we restore that again? And so that was really a big part of our mission. Of course, didn't have any idea how to do it, 17, 18 years ago. And so we made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Well, and this is not something that I went to college. My undergraduate degree was sociology. So, I went that way initially out of college myself, working within the criminal justice system. I don't recall that that's what you were studying in college, and you went into corporate America.
Yeah.
So this minister, I guess, was he the one, or she? She,
yeah.
She the one that really gave you the impetus to move, as I had said in the intro?
She did, and she did it in the most, for me, in our relationship, unorthodox. And I had gone into her office. Her name is Mother Davette Turk, and she's well known in our community. She was the first woman ordained in Florida, Episcopalian priest. Mm-hmm. She marched with Martin Luther King back in the late 50s, early 60s. She was actually on the FBI's undesirable list because how was a nun, a Catholic nun, fraternizing with the likes of the Martin Luther Kings of the world? Wow. And so she was big into that. And so she started in 1990 with myself and 8 other people, Reconcile Jacksonville, which was born to marry black and white churches together because it's the most discriminated day of the week is Sunday, and so segregated, I should say, day of the week. And so what the goal of that was to figure out how can we begin to blend people together, black and white, on a really spiritual note. And so that began Reconcile Jacksonville. And so I went to Bowles. I had one African-American in my graduating class. I knew none of the issues. And
for folks who might not know listening, Bowles is?
High school in Jacksonville, Florida, private school here in Jacksonville, Florida. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, to fast forward a bit, we began that journey in 1990, which we had 40 churches in Jacksonville that we've married. I go to St. Paul's by the Sea in Jacksonville Beach. We still have the same partnership with AME Church that we started in 1990. And so that began it. But it also opened up my eyes, Steve, to how much I had in common because we had study groups. We worked together, with myself and other African Americans, and just the blending of that. And during that time, my eyes became more and more open about the commonality that I had that I didn't know, And so and then I was going on mission trips every year for probably 10 years. And one of those times, I was going to go in for my spiritual counseling from this priest friend of mine. I was now expecting her to pray on me and give me some words of encouragement. She looked at me and she says, before you do this next trip, she goes, and this is not going to sound very priesty, okay? She goes, I want you to get in your fancy-ass little car. I was driving a little BMW. She goes, I want you to drive to the northwest side of town and take, a week or two, and then come back and tell me why you think you need to go to some other continent and do work. There's plenty of work to be done here.
Wow.
And I didn't even know what she was doing. But I did. She signed this wonderful African-American guy to go with me, and he kind of introduced me, took me into parts of town that I'd never been. And so several things happened, Steve, to me. Obviously, my eyes were open to like, wow, my own city, that things could really be this tough and this bad. But the other part that hit me was how I had inadvertently become a part of that problem because I had these comfortable blinders on that I was wearing, living at the beach, driving from Jacksonville Beach to town every day, and comfort, no problems, no issues.
Right.
While really that tale of two cities was going on in my own city. So anyway, so I got back, and she knew what she was doing, because when I came back, I was like, I'm changed. And so, short term after that, I made this decision that it was time, that I just needed to. So I took what I thought was going to be a 6-month sabbatical, and started Operation New Hope.
Wow. And then you've been recognized by 3 presidents. If you could, just briefly about that.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. I think, sometimes you step out and you don't know exactly what you're stepping out to. And, I come from the faith world. I don't allow my staff to preach at anybody. We don't talk about Jesus, because folks are tired of hearing things. They want to see things. They want to see love. They want to see help. And so, but I do believe with all my heart that the God of our understanding, when we really become more in tuned and aligned with what's there and what's out there for us to do, we all have gifts and talents. I never really knew what mine were. I was always a pretty good salesman. I knew that, but when I became open because of her encouragement, just to say, get out of your comfort zone, open your eyes and your heart. There's amazing what can happen in that. And I think there's a lot of people out there that probably can relate to that, but you have to come to that place. And I got to that place. And so to get back to what you asked about with the president's acknowledgement, it was really more validation for me. When I got a call in 2003, and we'd been really deep into this work we've been doing on helping people in the community that we learned that had these issues with, being incarcerated. President Bush began his faith-based initiative, the search for that, in 2002 to 3. And he started sending circulars out around the country to labor, to justice, to HUD, and said, are there programs out there that we should be looking at that maybe aren't your typical United Way programs, but maybe some really good smaller programs that we need to really build capacity on? And somebody within the sheriff's office here had sent a note back and said, hey, we don't really have a formal relationship, but we had been sending people from our Duval County Jail to Operation New Hope's, operation over there. And because we would hire them. And what I had done, Steve, is I started a nonprofit construction company because I really got enamored with the idea of using the construction sites as a way to rebuild. So we had the byproduct of rebuilding physical properties at the same time people. And what I didn't realize that those folks weren't coming back into the Duval County Jail with the rate that the criminal justice system was used to. And President Bush got wind of it at the White House. And I got a call one day.
So you're talking about recidivism here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Absolutely.
And it was on the good side.
On the good side, right.
Good side.
Absolutely. Those that were being directed to us from the jail weren't coming back with the regularity that the sheriff's office and others were used to. And so I got a call, I'll never forget, and I thought it was somebody playing a joke on me because I'm the biggest practical joker in the world. And, I have never had a call from the White House. And so when a lady calls and says, I'm calling on behalf of George W. Bush, and he'd like for you to be at the White House next Wednesday, I had to pause for a moment, and I'm playing around with her. Then I go, well, ma'am, I think I'm going to be busy, but I'll certainly try to work it in. And I heard this pause on the phone, and I said, ma'am, you still there? She goes, yes. Can you make it? And I said, I will certainly try. And so a week later, I'm at the White House sitting in the Roosevelt room with the president, the attorney general, Ashcroft, Secretary of Labor Elaine Chao, Chuck Colson from Prison Fellowship, who was part of Nixon's group, right. Watergate, and a couple of staffers, and myself, this African-American pastor who had really helped me early on. And we didn't know that. When we got to Washington, nobody prepped us on. I thought we're going to be a big part of a big group, and normally happens.
Here you got a private audience.
And when we were sitting there, and waiting to go in to meet, and the pastor and I, this pastor was a former drug lord in New York, moved to Jacksonville about 25 years ago. Big dude, and he and I look over at him, and he's got sweat. His shaved head all over the top of his head, and I was too, because it both hit us that we were about to go in for a private meeting with the president, and neither one of us were prepared. We didn't have notes of anything, a presentation, and really, I think both of us had this panic attack. We're walking down to the to the Roosevelt room, and we go in, and there's this beautiful table with 8 chairs and the president's logo on it, and And we sit down, and each of the folks started coming in, and I literally, we were just kind of blown away. It was very surreal. But here's what happened. It was pretty remarkable. President ends up coming in and greeted us all, and he just had this unique sense about him, knowing that, especially the pastor and I were very nervous. But he also brought with him an African-American guy who was probably in his early, mid-60s that the president had mentored when he was a governor in Texas. It was the most powerful moment that I can recall in my life, really. And so we're doing the introductions. It was obvious who the Secretary of Labor and all those guys were, and we did our introductions. And the president said, "I'd like to introduce my good friend, John." And John started telling a little bit of his story. And he said, I'd committed murder. I was a bad guy for a long time in Texas, and I'd committed murder. And then Governor Bush befriended me and used to come in and mentor me in the prison. And then he looks at President Bush at the time, and he says, "Mr. President, you'll never know what it meant every time you would come in, and you weren't afraid and worried about what people were thinking, that you had befriended somebody who committed murder." And the president reached up and grabbed his arm, and he looked at him. He said, "John," he goes, "let me tell you, when I looked in your eyes then and today, I didn't see a murderer. I saw a man who was changing. And I'm in the changing business, in the business of changing and transformations." And then the president started, that day, which he has done now numerous times, but it was the first time he shared about his own challenges. He said, I was drinking and had some major issues in my life. And I made a major transformation in my life that allowed me to get to where I am today. And so I believe in transformations. So that finishes, and Steve, and he spins around in his chair, President Bush, and goes, "So, Mr. Gay, tell us what's going on in Jacksonville, Florida." And I looked at him, and I said that. So, how in the heck do you follow that? And he just, started laughing. And but we did, and we had this. I said, "Well, guess what, Mr. President? I'm excited to know that we've got a president that believes in transformations, because that's what we're really in the business of doing in Jacksonville, Florida." Wow. And that began that part of the process. Fast forward a couple years, 2008. I'm sitting in my office late in the afternoon, and I get a call from a friend that said, "Did you know that you're in President Clinton's book that just came out, a book called Giving that he wrote, how something about changing the world?" And I mean, why he got me, but he talked about me leaving the corporate world and starting Ready for Work, and talked about the numbers and the success.
You don't know how he got connected?
Well, there was a big article I did come to find recently in the Orlando Sentinel that's owned by LA Times, and apparently they carried it in several other. Okay. And his researchers had found that. Okay. And I ran into him though when he was in town 3 weeks ago for pitching for Hillary. And I had never met him before, and I had a chance to get a photo op with him, and I introduced myself to him. I said, "Mr. President, I want to thank you. You and your book that you had, Giving." He goes, "Oh, I was very proud of that." I said, "Well, you talked about me in the book." And you could see his look like, "Well, who are you?" I said, "I have a program in Jacksonville working in prisoner reentry." He goes, "Oh, Ready for Work." And
he remembered it.
He remembered it. And so not only did he remember it, when we had finished our photo ops and had gone into the church, it was a big church on the northwest side of town, he's talking, and then he stops, and he's talking about barriers that Hillary and, that are important about knocking down. He goes, "But, one of the ones we have to work on is our work on helping people coming home from prison. It's a major issue in America. And we happen to have one of the best programs in America right here in Jacksonville, Florida." And he pointed me out, and I'm sitting there going, "How in the heck?" And then President Obama, I think it was a year later when he was running for office, was coming through town, and we had a chance to meet. And a couple weeks later, after our meeting, in a speech he did in Zanesville, Ohio, on religion, he talked about us as well. So, and then I ended up being invited to be on his transition team on the faith-based office. So, for me, Steve, it was getting back to that whole thing where when we step out, not knowing what the hell we're doing, but when our heart is really, truly there and trying and making mistakes along the way. I could list tons of them, but the heart and the intention of making that commitment of trying to do something different and unique. Got some pretty unique affirmation in this case.
Really. A long way from bowls.
Yeah.
When we look at personal resilience, and typically it's involved with behaviors and habits to help us sustain an already existing healthy state. How How do you connect that to the ex-offenders that you work with? Because we usually talk about grit. We talk about tenacity. Yeah. We talk about stick-to-itiveness, sustainability. What are the top 2 or 3 behaviors and habits that Operation New Hope helps your client base with?
Well, that's an interesting question, Steve. And when I think about that, it really challenges me in that scenario, because I'd like to say that we were able to introduce something that created or somehow brought resiliency to light. But as you know, because you're one of the most positive people, you've said that to me, but you're one of the most positive people I've ever met. There is something that's really deep within all of us, though, is that desire to be successful. And what I think we're tasked with, and what my staff is tasked with, is helping to pull that back out again. And what we found in there is a combination of 2 things that have to come to play, is to create that vision of hope again, where someone can become hopeful. And then what I've learned is this population that has just broken my heart, I mean, literally has broken my heart and touched me in the most unbelievable ways because of all of the things that they have been through. I mean, I will never in a million years be able to understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of a young African-American male and hear no after no after no from an employer saying, I just can't, because of the record thing.
Right. And if I can interrupt, you mentioned before we started recording today, not only in employment, but in housing.
Across the board. I mean, housing, Pell Grants, food stamps. I mean, it's just, we have set so many barriers in front of folks that really are set up for failure. I mean, the whole model we have is broken. The whole criminal justice system really, truly is broken in this capacity. And what it's also done is really, take that little glimmer of hope that most people have away. But what's beautiful about it, though, and you and I've shared this a couple times, what has been so compelling for me and my staff is this powerful resiliency that almost every single one of the folks that we work with have. And it's about pulling that out. Because what's happened is, I think these folks have been through the toughest school of hard knocks that you can ever imagine. And so there's a toughness. You talk about grit. It's there. And it's been really something that has been built through the challenges and through the trauma and through the heartbreak and through the, seeing and witnessing all that these folks have seen. That survival mode that we as human beings have is powerful. And so and I talked about this, we had a big staff meeting on Friday. It was really I call it a fireside chat. And it was really reminding our staff about the opportunities we have to really change the national discourse. This is not about us. It's not about Jacksonville. It's really about being at the front of proving to our country that the myth that's been perpetrated, that a certain population of people don't want to be good parents or dads, don't want to support their family, don't want to work, want to break the law, it's all they want to do, is absolutely false. And by doing what we do, and when we do it well, is bringing the best of the best out in these folks. We get to show somebody else, somebody else. Matter of fact, just Tom Wills, when he did an award ceremony, he's a anchor of one of our top shows, said, I'm going to have the pleasure tonight to highlight a lot of people who you won't see on the 6 o'clock news, thank goodness, because their lives have changed. Yeah. And it's about really sharing that story about who these folks are and putting a human face on a stat.
And I like, it caught me, and I wrote it down here, which is it's pulling out an already existing resilience that we all have, and especially the folks you're working with. Also, this becomes semantics, I know, but we were talking earlier about the term ex-offender. Just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I and most people in this work around the country have been struggling to begin to humanize what this journey is, because most of the conversations in the past have been ex-con. It just sounds like such a tough, label, really. And so we tried to soften it over the years. And ex-offender, an offender is somebody who goes in and they're an offender while they're in prison as an inmate, and then ex-offender is when they come out.
Right.
But that label, is like the scarlet letter, when you come out, felon, ex-offender. So there's been a conversation around that I actually liked for a while because it's closer to being a human, that is a returning citizen. But then I started thinking about the other thing that we do in America, and that is not only do we eliminate the opportunity for jobs and all that, but you can't vote. And there is such rich data now, Steve, that talks about improved recidivism when we really treat people like human beings and help those that get the ability to have their civil rights restored and can vote, their recidivism numbers come down. It's like, duh. Somebody's feeling, wow, I'm feeling like I'm part of the family, the citizen, the community again. And so I struggle now with even using that term returning citizen. It's returning people, returning neighbors, and so it's a tough one.
And do you, with Operation New Hope, you're working with the people, the ex-offenders, the returning citizens. What about the families?
Absolutely.
Do you work with them as well?
Mm-hmm.
What's the big challenge they have?
Well, and that's a great question. What we learned several years ago, and I learned this from my staff, 5-ish years ago, my board challenged me. So we're getting all these folks jobs now. How many of them are paying child support? And so we looked at it, and the numbers were still pretty low. And there was a dynamic there that somebody was making, minimum wage, or Department of Revenue was going after 40% of salary to pay child support. And when you're coming out, there's no way that you could rub the pennies together and make it work. And so I went to the Department of Revenue in Tallahassee and said, look, I think I have an answer. It's not that folks don't want to pay child support. Actually, they really do, because that's part of the goals that our folks say. They want to take care of their kids and their family. But they also have to figure out how to survive. I said, so could we try something? And could we reduce those child support payments for the first 3 to 6 months? Let our folks get their feet on the ground and get stabilized a little bit. And then let's negotiate that up each month where they can afford to make that payment to JEA, to the electrical company, or get that deposit on an apartment, and then begin to start paying that payment because they want to. And so
so they're getting their feet on the ground, and they're starting with your negotiated settlements or adjustments, beginning a discipline.
Right. That's
paying
right.
this, paying this,
Absolutely.
paying this, and getting into that habit.
That's right. And the self-esteem that we saw that was coming from that was remarkable. About, wow, I'm doing the thing. I'm being the man that needs to do that. And it's not that folks didn't want to; they just didn't know how to navigate that. So that started happening. And I was in a staff meeting about 4 years ago, and I was talking to our executive team. I said, wow, look what we're doing now. We're creating new dollars for families because of the jobs. And I had 2 of my key staff look at me, and one of them actually with tears, and said, it's way more than just the finance part of it. I went, And she happened to be the child of an ex-offender. Now, from an upper middle income family in Orlando, white family, Dad was a businessman, but also had a horrible addiction issue. He was in and out of prison and jail all the way through her middle school and high school. And the trauma it had on her, he died when she was 18, so he never got any kind of resolution.
Wow.
But she emotionally told the story to my staff. And then my number 2 person, chief administrative officer, African-American gal from Jacksonville, then started sharing her story of seeing at 4 years old, her dad dragged out of the house, her and her 3 siblings, handcuffs by the police in the middle of the night, and how she and her family were traumatized by seeing that. And so they were looking at me going, this is about the impact that this whole corrections has had on, like you said, the family and the children. And so, oh my God, my heart. So we started a program pretty close to them called Breaking the Cycle. And I went to Dolores Weaver, who was at the time one of the owners of the Jacksonville Jaguar football team, and a wonderful steward here in our community, philanthropist.
Yes, they are, yes.
And I shared with her the story, and she said, I want in. Wayne and I want to support it. And so they helped us launch this Breaking the Cycle program, which is now working with Malavi, Washington, the Bridge, the Sanctuary. We're now in public schools. We're working with the children of ex-offenders now, because we know they have been traumatized, and the impact on them, we believe now, is they're being dinged in school as being bad kids. They truly have what a lot of people are calling post-traumatic stress syndrome from really having witnessed things that young children aren't supposed to witness.
Yeah.
But not having the ability to process that. But we automatically assume something, you know? And we assume that just because they're the children of ex-offenders or the children born into poverty, that they inherited bad genes. All they inherited was all the trappings of poverty that came along with that, you know, jet stream, if you would, of their parents. And so what we've been working really hard, and it shows you once again, there's that great resilience.
Yeah.
Little help, little guidance, little direction, little encouragement. And we've seen some remarkable outcomes with these kids on less days in truancy and acting out. You know, so surprised.
But, you know, and your story, the story of Operation New Hope, as you were talking, and I got notes I'm jotting down here. You've been doing this for 2 decades. Day one, you didn't have the owners of a National Football League team knocking on your door saying, we'd like to help you.
Yeah.
And I love, you talk about behaviors and habits for resilience. I think folks listening to this, there's another lesson, not just for the ex-offenders, the returning citizens, but it's all of us. It takes this slow and steady progress. In Japanese, there's a word, kaizen, which is just continuous improvement, but slow, steady, small steps. And you've been doing that. And the impact that it then has on the community is phenomenal. And as, you know, and you're going out. You started in the small area of Jacksonville, but you're spreading your influence. And then you're hitting the families, and then that last story is powerful. You know, it's more than just the check for whatever the obligation is.
Right.
It's the ability to do it, the discipline.
And, you know, the great thing that we found with that, too, Steve, that has been so exciting, we didn't realize, and I think a lot of people talk about the gender imbalance that's happening in urban America. What I've found, I've had these young kids telling me this for years, young African-American males will say it. You know, everybody in the community calls me deadbeat. The community, my family, he said, even the baby's mom, you know, whoever, they don't understand how hard it is to get a job, you know, when you've broken the law. So there's no payment coming in. And what we found, that was the wall that did not allow a lot of these men to reconnect. And as soon as the child support payment started coming in, everything changed.
All right, let's go to that. I was looking at the a report from World Prison Brief, and according to that report, the U.S. leads the world in incarcerating people when we look at total numbers. Okay, and there are various reasons we could look at for that. People listening to you, there still might be those non-believers out there. Okay, those who paint the ex-offenders as lost, unsalvageable, they got what they deserved, we don't want to support them.
Right.
What have you found to be the best way to bring those folks on board? To say it's not that simple, it's not that black and white, it's not that dichotomous.
Well, when you think about that, when you just teed it up, I think everybody in our country should ask the question, why do we incarcerate 5 times more than any country in the world on average when you think about it? We're 5%, a little less than 5% of the world population, but we're 25% of the world's incarcerated population. 2.5 million men, women, and youth, 750,000 that come home every year. Do we just have a country with a lot of bad people? Absolutely not. And what is interesting when you look around, and I've spent way too much time looking at this over the years, people laugh at Norway, and Norway is at 74 per 100,000. They gauge this, you know, incarceration rate per 100,000 people.
Incarcerated.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're at 760 per 100,000. And so Canada is 108 per 100,000. The UK is, and they think they're in a crisis mode, by the way. They're like 140 per 100,000. And we're, you know, 760. And so why? And I believe with all my heart, and I think most criminologists and a lot out there, not a lot of politicians, we've tried to use our criminal justice system to address a lot of social justice issues. Our prisons in America and jails are the largest mental health facilities in our country by far. No question, you can't argue those stats.
Yeah.
And when you go into some jails and prisons and see people with significant mental health issues, we should not be treating those folks as prisoners. we should be helping them. And I go back to Norway. Norway has been criticized around the world. People laugh at them is how much money they spend on rehabilitation. Well, guess what? People don't go back in. You know, we spend probably, not only do we incarcerate 5 times more than most countries in the world, we spend less than most countries in the world. The conditions are horrible. I call it 2 sentences in America. You may have a sentence with the Department of Corrections in any state, but the moment you walk out, sentence number 2 begins, and it's a lifetime sentence. And so we're doing something in America that no other country does. And so I'm excited, though, that there is this window that's opening a little bit. People are beginning to listen to these conversations. People are beginning to say, wait, you mean we can do something different? Yeah. And they look at programs like ours around the country and say, wait, I mean, working, and you said that Japanese analogy, which I like, kind of a slow, steady, intentional, and that's really what our work is all about, is that we grab a hold of somebody and our staff is mandated to walk with them and process with them and help them transition through all of these important steps together. And it's a slow, methodical step.
Yeah, and that intentionality is so important. All right, before we close it up, I'll give you the opportunity. Is there anything we have not touched on that you'd like to address, or is there something you want to go back to as a final emphasis? I'll give that to you.
Well, there's so much, Steve. You know, and
we need to have you come back for another episode.
Well, I'd be honored, and I really appreciate this opportunity more than you know. I think the most important thing that I tell people, that if somebody says, well, what is this so what? If you had, somebody say what your work that you've been involved in, is that if I could get people to see what I have seen, and that's hard, you know, but what I have seen, and I said this at a summit that I had in November where I brought people from around the country in. I thought I would make it easier for people if I raised my hand and said, I was one of them, 30, 25 years ago. Even though I've always had a good heart, I've always wanted to help people. By omission and by not doing something, I had become a part of the problem. And that's what I said to the group. I said, I realized that by me just dismissing or buying into a myth that has been perpetrated in America, I was a part of the problem. Yeah. And when I got this proximity shift, this I think is really probably the key for any of us. When we've faced issues, when we get closer to the issues, this is where racism and all these issues will be addressed. When we get closer and closer and closer, we find out how much more we have in common. Yeah. And that's what happened to me. And I hope that happens to more and more people in our country.
And that's powerful. And that's going to lead into, for those who listen on a regular basis to these podcasts, I like to finish with a call to action. It's the old school teacher in me. It's your homework. And these acts of omission that you're talking about, we're good people, but by not doing, by not taking action, which is something you had said earlier on in this conversation, we got to go beyond words. We got to take action. Okay. And so the call to action then I'm going to put out to the listeners today based on what Kevin has been saying to us. So let's say you're an employer. What can you do? Are you willing to hire an ex-offender or work with an organization like Operation New Hope in your community? And if you're already employing ex-offenders, how can you mentor other employers to do the same? So let's say you're not an employer. You're an individual like me out there. What can we do with the skills and experiences we have? How could we mentor someone who needs a life coach? You're a voter. How can you educate and hold your elected officials accountable? Or maybe it's you want to write a check. How can you help support the efforts of Operation New Hope and like-minded organizations in your hometown? Again, if you go to operationnewhope.org, you can get information on how you could help if you're in this area, or if you're not, and if you wanted to provide some financial support, you can do that as well. But check out your own community for these types of organizations. Again, Kevin, this has been phenomenal. Probably, I'd say one of the more powerful conversations I've had in a long, long time, and that's in part to your It's really an understated enthusiasm that you have. And when I say understated, that's not uncommitted. But you don't run around with pom-poms, but you talk to Kevin for 2 minutes, and you know this man is committed to what he is doing into our community. So we appreciate that. I'm going to finish with something you didn't know I was going to do. I like to have fun with the guests here at the end, okay? I'm going to call this the excitement round. I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Okay.
All right? You have had no idea on this. Let's see how good you are on your feet. This is almost like being back in the Roosevelt room, all right? You step in to get a cup of coffee at your local coffee shop. You look up at the board, and you got all those things. There's mochas, there's whatever they call them. What would you be if you were up on that? Would you be a black coffee? Would you be one with whipped cream? Would you be one with sugar? What would Kevin be?
Wow. That, I got to be honest, that is not a question that has been presented.
I wouldn't think so.
I would hope that I would be, kind of probably one of those crazy drinks that I don't order. Maybe a mix of things, from the standpoint of, I definitely believe I'd have cream in the coffee because I do believe in that mix is so important in life, and I hope at times there's some sweet in there too. And so, I hope there's a combination of that. I do have my moments with the whipped cream where I like things to be, celebratory. And so, I would probably, want to,
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I think you need to go to your local coffee shop and tell them to put a Kevin Gay up there.
That's right.
All right, the second
It'd be
one.
interesting to see what they would put up there.
And, when I first met Kevin, it was at the local gym here at the beach years ago.
Yep.
So we walk into the gym, and there's an exercise at the gym. What exercise would you be at the gym? What piece of equipment would you be?
Well, I've been a runner for a long, long time. Probably the treadmill, because I think that steady, just continuing to say, no matter what the heck's going on, I'm going to continue to persevere, as opposed to kind of the one-hit wonder going in and hitting something, It's something I try to do every day. And so, because I think the work that we're in, and I think in anything we all want to do in our life, it's about doing it over. You're a good musician. You're good at all the things you do them every day.
Consistency.
Yeah.
Yep. And the last one, you're a weather forecast. What are you?
I like to say sunshine on a cloudy day.
And we will end it with that. So thank you, listeners, for joining us today. Without you, there's no Growth and Resilience Network. I thank you for sharing our podcast with family, friends, colleagues, and community leaders. That's how they learn about operations like Operation New Hope and what good people like Kevin Gay are doing. Visit my website, stevepiscitelli.com, for more information about upcoming conversations and about my programs and other resources for your personal growth and resilience. And while you're at the website, you are able to sign up. I made it easy to sign up for my email and newsletter list. So until we meet again, either virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida, reminding all of us to choose well, live well, and be well. Bye-bye, folks.